What's going on? I want to take a minute to talk to you guys about cake. Gluten free, vegan, or good old fashioned. Cake in general. I bring it up because I think, after a number of watches of this movie, that for myself anyway, I've been able to whittle down in the simplest terms what I think this movie is about. And with that, I'd like to shift gears to Spider-Man, Across the Spider-Verse. Let's talk about it. This movie is a tour de force. It's been near universally praised for its sheer awesomeness. And I mean that in the truest sense of the word awesome. So, awe-inspiring. It's a big movie. It's a meaty movie, clocking in at about just under 2 hours and 15 minutes or so. It's a full-on situation. It's probably safe to say that this movie is a masterpiece, but there's probably a better way to phrase it. Hyperbolic terms and descriptors have been thrown around about this movie. Some hailing it as possibly the best Spider-Man film, best superhero film ever made. Personally, I'm not sure I agree with that. Again, that's my opinion. Now, to be clear, I did love this movie quite a bit. I've seen it now 3 times. Harry has seen it twice. Aunt May has seen it. You know, just kidding. Just kidding. But if you've watched any video on this channel, there's been a couple Spider-Man videos on this channel. You probably know that I'm a big Spider-Man fan. Have been since I was a kid, like many others who enjoy this movie. But I want to go back to Cake for a second. I think that after a few viewings, that this movie is about cake. And what I mean by that is this notion of having your cake and eating it too. Any great sequel should, I think, take elements of what made the first part of the story great and expand on those themes, expand on what was established, and build on that. You name any solid second film, second story, second part of a story, and they do that. The best ones do that. This film is no exception. Where Cake comes in, particularly has to do with there's a line in the film uttered by the guidance counselor at Miles's school, and she tells his parents that Miles can't have his cake and eat it too. I think that seems like such a throwaway line, even when you consider the context of the line, which basically has to do with Miles as a student and son, to Rio and Jeff, friend, member of the community in Harlem or Brooklyn. And he's also Spider-Man, crime fighter. He's responsible for his community. Can he do both? This film catches up with him obviously struggling with that, as is sort of typical for most heroes, but particularly for Spider-Man. One of the core elements of the character has been his double life. This is the sort of crux point. What does it mean to be Spider-Man? What does it mean to sacrifice a lot of these things for your aspects of your personal life to be Spider-Man. You know, lying to the people you love, trying to protect them and everyone else, and you know, not losing your heart, your humanity, your sanity in the process, and still trying to maintain, you know, some semblance of a normal life. What does it mean to do both? Is it sustainable? You go back to Sam Raimi's trilogy, Spider-Man 2, executes this theme very well, which really comes down to choice. If you can whittle down each of those films into one word as sort of what they're about. So the first film was about responsibility, and the second film was about choice, and the third film was about forgiveness. Spider-Man 2, with regard to the notion of Peter having to choose, and does he want to do this forever? He's going through a lot of stuff in that movie. He's seeing what being Spider-Man is costing him. He's undergoing all this anguish. And for every win, there's a loss, or two probably. And I think the same is true in this film, Across the Spider-Verse, where Miles he's trying to do the best he can. He's a good student. He's a good kid. But he's crumbling a little bit under the weight of the responsibility of being Spider-Man. And the movie really takes that to the extreme when you consider the main plot point of this film, which has to do with whether or not Miles, his existence in the multiverse as a Spider-Man, and what he then is faced with in terms of having to choose between who he can save and if he should save certain people. That, you've seen this choice sort of thrown at Spider-Man. You can go back to the first film, the Sam Raimi film, where Green Goblin is having Mary Jane and a whole bunch of kids and teachers, and Spider-Man is forced to choose who he can save. Ultimately, if you've seen the movie, you know what happens. It's that the element of attempting to do both is also the core of what Spider-Man is about. Whether he can do it successfully is another issue, and not one that Spider-Man is concerned with. It's about, you have this choice, and it's a conundrum. You want to do both, so you try to do both. And Miles is no exception. Whatever the choices that are in the mix, Miles Morales or Spider-Man, which one do you want to do? There is a choice, but he's chosen to do both. And so it's that element of having chosen to be both Miles Morales and Spider-Man that's at the crux of any choice he is sort of navigating with regard to Spider-Man stuff. The primary antagonist of this film, you could we have Spot, who is played by Jason Schwartzman, who comes off as, you know, a weak villain initially, but we see that that's a very different situation by the time we get to the end of the film. Next to him, you have Miguel O'Hara, who we all know as Spider-Man 2099, who you could make a good case for as the other antagonist, the other sort of oppositional force against Miles and what he's about, what he's up to. They have a fundamental disagreement about how to approach Spider-Man stuff, and that becomes the actual core conflict. You think it's going to be between Miles and Spot, and it is, but really, the further you get, you find that the core conflict becomes between Miles and Miguel, and that is where all sorts of interesting things take place. And so this, going back to Cake, choosing to be Spider-Man while being Miles Morales, I think is a good example of having your cake and eating it too. Which, when you think about that expression, it's a strange expression when taken literally. When we have a slice of cake in front of us, are we not supposed to eat it? Don't you eat it when you have it, when you have your cake? I mean, I get what it means. I'm just saying, when you think about that, it's like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Yes, I can. This is what Miles is saying. This is what Spider-Man in general, the character, says. This is what the mantle of Spider-Man is. You can have your cake and eat it too. It doesn't mean you won't get a stomachache after you've eaten that piece of cake. It doesn't mean there won't be consequences for that. Because, as we've seen, Miles, Peter, Gwen, any spider person, to our knowledge, has had to suffer the consequences of having your cake and eating it too. It's not about the fact that you can't. It's about attempting to do both and dealing with whatever happens after that. So I think ultimately, Across the Spider-Verse, again, like Into the Spider-Verse, it's the most quintessential Spider-Man. It's the most quintessential of Spider-Man stories, in that it really has, it calls back to the Stan Lee, Steve Ditko era of like the early days of Spider-Man comic book stories. You could take it back to even Amazing Fantasy, Spider-Man's first appearance. That whole issue, like the closing panels of that first Spider-Man story, is about him choosing to accept the responsibility of being Spider-Man. He suffers a tragedy. He makes a choice. I'm going to do this. And that dictates all of his moves going forward. Similarly, this is the deal with Miles. Across the Spider-Verse, particularly in the second act, that element, that notion of choice, and Miles doubling down on that choice, that decision, is what puts him at odds with Miguel, and by extension, the rest of the other Spider people. The film is fantastic, right? I've said that at the start of the video. I love the film. The music is fantastic. The soundtrack is great. The animation is resplendent. You don't think they could have improved upon what they've done with the technology and the animation from the first film, but they've managed to improve it. The Spider-Verse movies are really, they're taking some real risks, and they're not losing the essence of what makes Spider-Man. And I think that is ultimately how they're managing to win, no matter who's Spider-Man. But they're just doing it in a way that actually is very strong and very sound, and respects it respects the characters, and it respects the character of Spider-Man and the mythos of Spider-Man. Speaking of that, the mythos of Spider-Man, and one of my big issues with the film that I don't know that a lot of people are talking about. I know at one point they might have been when Into the Spider-Verse came out, and this was one of my problem with Into the Spider-Verse too. That's this. You see this? This panel in the comic books is Peter and Gwen. They acknowledge that they could not save their respective people, their respective versions of themselves, of each other in their universes. And it's very touching. It makes me tear up every time I see the panel. My problem with the Spider-Verse films, and especially, that was my problem with the first film, and I think it feels much more glaring in this film because of there's a connection with Gwen Stacy's father, or a version of Gwen Stacy's father in this film. And still, there is no acknowledgement between Peter B. Parker and Gwen Stacy of their respective people. I guess, and that bothers me. For a film, for both films, to be such love letters to the character, the ethos, the mythology, the lore, and everything Spider-Man across all media, to not give you a nugget of the recognition of the importance of Gwen Stacy to Peter is an issue for me. And again, I'm that's a nitpick probably, but because this is, again, the film is fantastic, and it's a 10 out of 10. But that bothers me because Gwen, she was the Mary Jane before Mary Jane. Well, she was Pete was going to marry her in the comics, and these movies don't reference that. So I'm hoping that and it not even in the smallest ways, and that is a problem for me. I'm hoping that Beyond the Spider-Verse does this. Beyond that, I loved everything else. I loved particularly the nuanced moments. There's so many moments of nuance in this film that are just beautiful, for lack of a better word. There are moments where characters don't even say anything, and tons of things are communicated. There's a moment before Miles and the mom are going to have a one-to-one conversation, and his parents are standing beneath the water tower with him, and they share a look, and immediately the conversation that they're having without them having to utter any words. And the way it's animated, it's just spot on. It's fantastic. It's great. And nothing is lost in translation. Nothing feels awkward or weird or off about it. It feels totally true to that moment and totally true to what that would be like in real life. It's beautiful. And, there's moments between Miles and Gwen when they're not talking. There's like hand gestures, body language. Things are being communicated very subtly. And it's just enough. If you're paying attention, you'll catch what is being communicated. And I guess I'm blown away by how well the animators captured something so tiny in how it and how what an impact that makes. It's fantastic. I love also the quieter moments of this film are just beautiful. The conversation between Miles and his mom, each time I've seen the film, it always makes me cry. It's the kind of conversation that feels so authentic. And it's also the kind of conversation, I think, at least for me, it's a conversation I wish I would have had I could have with either one of my parents. At that age, at 15 or whatever it was, I wished I could have had a conversation like that. Conversations between Miles and Gwen, the quiet moments. I also love that, they go on a little swing date, literally. They get to swing around the city together, and it's beautiful. It's like, it feels like, you get to, you're reliving your first crush, first love type situation. That's how I felt. I thought it was beautiful. And then the nuances of like the body language that she gives him, like little love taps. She'll tap him on the shoulder. She's doing little pats, just little stuff like that. And it feels so like the animators pay them. Speaking of getting paid, there's plenty of shots in this film that need to get paid. The artwork in many of the sequences, particularly the opening sequence, is fantastic. By the way, it's its own little movie, and I think that's the sequence. Several shots in that sequence are pay any one of them. And particularly at the conclusion of that sequence, there's a shot I call the Blade Runner shot. It looks like this. It's a wonderfully framed shot. It's a beautifully lit shot. The colors are great. That's probably one of my favorite shots in the movie. There's tons of shots like that are fantastic. The other thing I appreciate about this film, in terms of how it builds upon Into the Spider-Verse, was how Uncle Aaron was handled. Like the mention of Uncle Aaron. If you've seen Into the Spider-Verse, he was the Prowler. In this film, Uncle Aaron, just the memory of him is not disrespected. I appreciated it that the character wasn't played like, because he was a bad guy, he's, we don't talk about him or whatever it is. No, Uncle Aaron was a very important figure and remains an important figure in Miles's life. So the fact that you can acknowledge Uncle Aaron's shortcomings while acknowledging the good things he had, the good qualities he had, and the sort of the good messages he left behind is the best possible way to keep the legacy of that character intact, even though he was a bad guy. That isn't what you're left with. You're not left with the fact that he was a bad guy. He was a bad guy who had a good heart. He wanted to be good, and that is, I like that he wasn't treated like just another one of the like hood black dudes who succumbed to his tragic his tragic end because of his life in the streets, and it was just that, oh, he was a bad guy, and I think as a black man, I think it's important to have the dichotomy recognized. Aaron was a human who made some bad decisions, but his heart was good, and he wanted what was best for Miles. And I think that piece being highlighted, and being sort of the last piece of what's talked about his character is important. I think, and it's healing. I think that in this this part of the media, that Uncle Aaron isn't sort of this. He's not left to be. Yeah, he was a bad guy, and that was it. Like, the film really respects his memory and respects his what he means to Miles, and I really appreciated that. My only other issue with the film really has to do with some of the writing. Very little of it. The writing overall is very, very strong. There's just little things, sort of details, minutia, in terms of like when certain things are uttered. Does it make sense? That's the thing. Some lines don't make sense given what preceded them, and that's they don't make total sense. They make sense on a figurative level, but just in terms of conversationally, making it feel like a real conversation. I didn't fully buy the reality of like how someone would respond to a certain preceding sentence or whatever it is. That's it. But otherwise, I can't complain. It's great. It's a great, great movie, and I may see it again at some point very soon. I'm sure you've seen the movie, which is why you're probably watching this video. If you haven't seen the movie and you're watching this video, go see the movie, please. You won't be disappointed. And also, should you care to read the review, I wrote a review about this as well. The link can be found in the description below this video. But I think that's all really I have to say right now on this film. And I really do love it. I love it. I can't believe they. I'm not surprised. I should be. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. It's just as good to me, I think, than Into the Spider-Verse. Maybe slightly better. Slightly. It's not by much though. I hope that Beyond the Spider-Verse is even halfway good. If it's even half as good as this, I'll be happy. If you stuck around this long, thank you for watching this video. There's a ton of other things you could be doing with your time, and I just appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. And I'll be back with some more reviews coming up really soon. In the meantime, I got some web slinging to do. So take it easy, be well, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay?